When something smells foul, what do? You crinkle your nose almost reflexively. Why? Because that action literally constricts the nasal passage, reducing the intake of noxious odors. Similarly, when you trip, you don't debate whether to put your arms out in front of you, it just happens. These are automatic responses. The concept at work here is what Charles Darwin called the principle of serviceable associated habits. That is, we form habits under distinct states of mind when those habits satisfy some practical needs. In 2009, the American psychologist Carol Izard published a paper reinforcing this idea by focusing on emotions. Emotions, he argued, are evolutionary gifts. They help us determine what experiences are good or bad, forging the path for more refined communication and superior decision making. Evolution, it seems, gave us emotion because it was useful. But all gifts come with a price tag. The same emotional machinery that help us cooperate, love, and innovate can also turn inward, manifesting in harmful mental states like despair or depression. So here's our first big question. If evolution is all about helping us survive, why are we saddled with sadness? Why isn't the end goal simply perpetual happiness? As it turns out, sadness and other negative emotions are also protective in the right context. Fear keeps us away from predators. Grief can strengthen social bonds by eliciting care from others. But clearly, these mechanisms can go haywire, an unfortunate byproduct of our complexity. Let's talk about a hunting story from 2011 in China. A mother bear held captive in a bile farm heard her cub's screams. She broke free, ran to her baby, smothered it with a hug, and then bashed her own head into a wall, killing herself instantly. The incident challenges our assumptions about animal emotion. Was this a form of depression, a conscious act to escape unimaginable agony? We don't know. What we do know is that in controlled environments, multiple species, from rats to pigs, display behaviors that look a lot like depression. Weight loss, listlessness, a slump in cognitive function. Biologists and psychologists argue about whether animals can really experience sadness in the same way we do. But there's no doubt that we humans experience it, and, well, we get pretty creative about it. We can slip into despair over intangible worries like the meaninglessness of life or the dread that our problems may never end. If the capacity for sadness or depression is so widespread, you might wonder why evolution didn't weed it out. Paradoxically, some amount of sadness might be beneficial. It can slow us down, force us to assess our reality carefully, and seek help from friends and community. But that doesn't make it any less agonizing when sadness spirals out of control. So, is there a magical bullet to avoid life's darkest corridors? Historically, many cultures have answered that question with a resounding, yes, God. Picture this. It's about 13,000 BCE. Your ancestors, fully human but living in prehistoric conditions, have a strikingly vivid dream. The dream features a being that wields immense power and knows secrets you can't fathom. You awake to carve an image of it into a cave wall, hoping to capture that power or at least pay respect to its possible influence. Was that the first God? Possibly. But Émile Durkheim, a French sociologist, proposed a different angle. Religion is a social adhesive, a system of communal rites and shared beliefs that bind a group together. There's also agency detection theory, the evolutionary trait that primes us to suspect an unseen agent behind anything mysterious or unexplainable. Then there's theory of the mind. Since each of us only has access to our own consciousness, we often project our self-awareness onto the universe at large. Fast forward to 9600 BCE, and we see the blossoming of agriculture, but not how you might assume. Anthropologists speculate we first started planting crops and domesticating animals to better serve our gods, to offer them food and keep them satisfied. By 4500 BCE, the city of Uruk in Mesopotamia was bustling with irrigation systems, domesticated animals, and the earliest known attempts at large-scale civilization. Myths like the Sumerian epic of Atrahasis emerged, describing how gods flooded the earth to punish mankind. Here's the kicker. As we gave our gods more attention, we imbued them with our own traits. Hunger, anger, jealousy, love. They were a mirrored extension of humanity, but endowed with cosmic powers. In 1570 BCE, the Pharaoh Akhenaten tried something revolutionary in Egypt. He worshipped one deity, exclusively erasing every other deity's name from monuments. This was, in effect, the birth of monotheism. Sort of. Around the same era, the Iranian prophet Zarathustra, or Zoroaster, spoke of good and evil as cosmic foes, each the product of a supreme deity, Ahura Mazda. Meanwhile, the rest of the world generally stuck to henotheism, one primary god presiding over other lesser gods. But eventually, the concept of a single, all-powerful god crystallized in Judaism. In 586 BCE, Jerusalem fell to King Nebuchadnezzar II of Babylon, prompting the Israelites to ask, if war is a contest of gods, how did Yahweh lose to Marduk? The solution was to expand Yahweh into the supreme deity, higher, older, and mightier than all others. Over centuries, Jewish texts merged the storm god attributes with the paternal figure of El, forging the single omnipotent Yahweh that we recognize today. In time, Christianity branched out, introducing Jesus as the Logos, conflating humanity with divinity, and eventually articulating the Trinity, a theological tangle that insisted God was somehow both singular and threefold. Why bring up all this religion in a discussion about sadness and misery? Because we see a pattern. Humans can't resist searching for meaning. Maybe the universe is random, maybe life is short and ends in oblivion, but that's difficult to swallow. So we keep trying to quell the existential pit. Religion for millennia has offered one of the most compelling ways to do so. If there is a supreme being, then pain and sorrow must be part of some plan, and that notion can be comforting, or at least distracting. Yet, ironically, religious fervor has also sparked wars, persecution, and all sorts of heartbreak. So we have to ask, would we be less miserable if we all just stopped trying? If we ceased rummaging for cosmic significance, if we didn't cling to gods, if we refused to engage with existential questions, would we be happier? Perhaps, but perhaps not. Because refusing to try is itself another trap. Let's pivot from gods to romance. Charles Bukowski, famously described as the laureate of American lowlife. He's the guy who wrote, if you're going to try, go all the way. Otherwise, don't even start. But he's also the author of Love is a Dog from Hell, a title that suggests love is not a gentle puppy but a feral beast capable of tearing your heart into a confetti. Bukowski's early life was harsh. Growing up in a Depression-era Los Angeles with an abusive father, he constantly faced rejection and social ridicule. He tried not to try, spending days lost in fantasies, nights in cheap liquor. Did this abstention from ambition spare him from suffering? No. It merely traded one brand of misery for another. So here's the paradox. We suffer when we chase something intensely. Yet not chasing anything can be equally corrosive. We can form entire religions to justify our search for cosmic meaning, or we can declare that meaning is an illusion and try to detach from it. But either route can lead us back to despair. For Bukowski, love was both the ultimate risk and the ultimate torment. Despite all the heartbreak it cost him, he kept chasing after it. From an evolutionary perspective, love is beneficial. It fosters pair bonding, stable families, and better survival for offspring. But Love also leaves us vulnerable to betrayal, grief, and heartbreak. It's the same dynamic we see with sadness. The emotional capacity that helps us connect can also wound us deeply. Hold on, let me just get a drink. Whew. Okay. So far, we've established that neither relentless trying nor total refusal to try inoculates us against misery. But we still see differences among individuals. Some endure devastating sadness, others float through adversity like emotional ninjas. Why? The World Health Organization notes that around 280 million people worldwide suffer from depression. Genetics can set the stage for gloom. Certain people have a predisposition. Environment, of course, also matters. Persistent stress, trauma, and poor social support are like fertilizers for depressive weeds. But not everyone in tough circumstances succumbs to deep depression, suggesting there's no single formula. Ever notice that telling yourself not to think about something only makes you think about it more? Psychologist Daniel Wegner named this the ironic process theory. When we command ourselves, don't be sad, our attention ironically fixates on sadness. The more we try to stamp it out, the more it lingers. Research from 2017 suggests that higher cognitive ability might help folks navigate negative thoughts by reframing them. At the same time, intelligence can amplify existential dread. The sharper your mind, the more vividly you might perceive life's absurdities or injustices. Taken together, the upshot is that while sadness is universal, it's not uniformly distributed. We vary in genetics, life experiences, and coping strategies. That's the bedrock of what makes the human story so varied and so perplexing. About 2,500 years ago, a young prince named Siddhartha Gautama witnessed suffering firsthand. Confronted by old age, sickness, and death, he left his comfortable palace to seek answers. After years of ascetic practices and deep meditation, he achieved enlightenment beneath the Bodhi tree and became the Buddha, or awakened one. His discoveries formed the core of Buddhism, emphasizing insight, compassion, and the end of suffering. But Buddha's teaching revolved around the Four Noble Truths. Life is marked by suffering, suffering has a cause, there is a way to end suffering, and the Noble Eightfold Path is that solution. Instead of worshipping a deity, Buddhists turn inward, investigating the nature of their own minds. In essence, Buddhism says that clinging to desires or aversions locks us into a cycle of dissatisfaction. But if we train ourselves to see reality clearly, we can cut through our illusions, awaken from ignorance, and discover a more stable form of well-being. That's the promise at the heart of the Buddha's message. Buddhism isn't monolithic. It branched into various schools that spread across Asia and eventually the world. Theravada, Buddhism prevalent in Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia, sticks closely to early Pali texts and emphasizes monastic practice. Mahayana, dominant in East Asia, introduces the concept of bodhisattvas, enlightened beings who delay their own final liberation to guide others. Then there's Vajrayana, often called Tibetan Buddhism, which uses esoteric rituals, mantras, and visualizations. Despite these variations, the core DNA remains the same. Life is fleeting, suffering is real, and we can transform our experience through disciplined practice. This adaptability explains how Buddhism keeps resonating with new generations seeking wisdom. Meditation is central to many Buddhist traditions, but it's not merely about sitting quietly. It's a systematic approach to studying your own mind. Techniques like vipassana cultivate mindful observation of each passing sensation, emotion, and thought, aiming to reveal the impermanent interdependent nature of all phenomena. Likewise, metta, or loving kindness practice, fosters compassion, not just for yourself but for all sentient beings. On a neurological level, such practices can rewire our brains, enhancing emotional regulation and empathy. Centuries ago, Buddhist monks were already exploring consciousness like laboratory scientists, but with closed eyes and measured breaths. Today, we see secular mindfulness programs, dialogues between Buddhist teachers and neuroscientists, and widespread interest in the nature of consciousness. Yet, Buddhism also grapples with moral questions through the five precepts guidelines to refrain from killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, and intoxication. These are not divine commands, but pragmatic reminders that unethical actions breed suffering. In the end, Buddhism is less about dogma and more about discovery. How do we minimize harm, maximize clarity, and lead a fulfilling life? Instead of promising salvation from above, it points inward, suggesting each individual holds the key to liberate themselves from the shackles of ignorance. That's Buddhism's timeless invitation. Awaken. Now, what does all this have to do with sadness? Buddhism says suffering isn't just physical pain but also emotional turbulence. Our relentless cravings wanting life to be different than it is fuel restlessness and sorrow. When we attach our identity to fleeting circumstances, heartbreak becomes inevitable. However, Buddhist practices don't deny sadness, they encourage us to observe it without judgment. By doing so, we discover that emotions like everything else rise and fall. Clinging amplifies misery, letting go eases it. That doesn't mean we shrug off life's pain and apathy. Instead, we respond from a place of calm understanding. This inner shift liberates us from drowning in our sorrow, reminding us that sadness is simply another wave passing across the surface of awareness. In other words, Buddhism offers not an escape from sadness but a way to transform our relationship with it, gently guiding us towards a more spacious, compassionate mind. So are we the saddest animal in existence? Quite possibly. No other creature frets so relentlessly about intangible woes, but that sadness is interwoven with the reason we paint masterpieces, write sonnets, invent new technologies, and form elaborate cultures. Sadness, ironically, might also be a springboard to kindness and understanding. By wrestling with despair, we gain the capacity to comfort one another. Buddhism offers a practical set of tools, the Noble Eightfold Path, to help us watch our minds closely, cut through craving, and liberate ourselves from the worst self-inflicted misery. Religion at large, for better or worse, is an expression of unstoppable hunger for meaning. Love, whether it's the romantic kind or the bond between a parent and child, can be both torment and salvation. Charles Bukowski never stopped calling it a dog from hell, but he also never stopped writing love poems. In the end, we can't outrun sorrow entirely. We can only reframe it. As the Buddha taught, we can learn to see it as a passing phenomenon, like clouds drifting across a sky, rather than an all-consuming identity. And in that quiet shift from I am sad to I feel sad, something remarkable happens. Sorrow loses some of its power to define us. Perhaps the price tag for our extraordinary consciousness is that we sometimes regret having it. We're stuck between the knowledge of our own mortality and an insatiable curiosity about what might lie beyond it. We yearn for perfect happiness in a reality that promises nothing is permanent. But it's precisely that tension that propels us to innovate, to empathize, to help a neighbor in need, to take one more shot at love. Our sadness is both a wound and a teacher, pointing the way toward the compassion, art, and wisdom that make life more than just mere survival. So are we the saddest animal in existence? Quite possibly, yes. But we're also the only animal that can look at our sadness, question it, create stories and gods around it, and even harness it to build new possibilities. That's the paradox of being human. We're gifted and cursed, triumphant and traumatized, proud and pitiful. And maybe, just maybe, that messy equation is exactly what makes us worth studying. understanding, and caring about. And hey, if sadness is the ultimate prize for a mind capable of endless wonder, maybe in the grand scheme of things, it's not such a bad deal after all.